You're listening to the Modern Mainframe, BMC's intelligent C optimization and transformation podcast, covering the latest trends and issues in the mainframe and how BMC AMI solutions can help you make change your competitive advantage. Hey everyone, welcome to the Modern Mainframe. I'm Matt Dallaire. Today we're talking about the impact generative AI can have on mainframe DevOps. Joining us for the discussion are Intellyx Director and Principal Analyst Jason English, BMC Vice President of R&D David Jeffries, BMC R&D Solutions Architect Anthony Distauro, and BMC Lead Product Manager Mark Schettenhelm. Jason, Dave, Anthony, Mark, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Thanks for the invite.
To start us off, Jason, can you tell us what you're seeing out there about the employment of generative AI in improving mainframe developer experience and how it can enhance the application developer journey?
Yeah, there's been a lot of excitement around the potential of AI for mainframe development so far. I think this stems from the fact that it is the hot new thing right now. So a lot of it has been hyped, but really it's to address a fundamental problem that we're seeing, especially on the mainframe, because a lot of what we know as current mainframe development is less architecture and more archaeology, right? There's this problem where we're trying to dig into the past and try to understand the original intentions of the COBOL application developers that were there, years or even decades ago, many of them not even still there, and try to unlock that and turn the tables on mainframe development so we can bring it back into delivering on what the current customer requirements are. So, modernizing the architecture so it can be compatible with today's platforms, so it can be interoperable with distributed cloud architectures, instead of just trying to keep the lights on, right? So, we were seeing AI as a possible way that we could kind of overcome this hump. But, let's face it, we're facing a huge crisis level shortage of skilled developers who really understand how to bridge this gap right now. So between the as-built systems and the modern architecture. So enterprises are really turning to generative AI-based solutions to try to get their arms around it and deal with this huge volume of code and data that exists in the mainframe state. So it's natural that we would expect it to do that, but the effectiveness of any AI solution is really only as good as the data it's trained on, right? So we really need AI models that are trained with a kind of innate understanding of a high volume of different types of transactions, and then how those transactions are translated into business requirements. So, we can't just expose a mainframe to the world and tell AIs to model themselves on it. That's just not even a tenable solution. So, we really see a lot of promise in this category, though, if we can have AI kind of work side by side with our developers, both the experienced one as well as the new ones coming onto the team, to help them get up to speed and understand, the context of what's happening.
Dave, how does generative AI streamline the onboarding, as Jason mentioned, of junior mainframe developers and make them more productive members of the team quicker?
Good question. I think I'll go back to when I think we all probably joined the mainframe when we all came out of college. We didn't just get kind of thrown into, there's your code, go modify it, go enhance it, etc. We sat with some knowledgeable developers. We sat with knowledgeable individuals who kind of told us how stuff happens and how stuff works. But I think the reality this day and age is that for people coming out of schools and colleges with Java skills or Python skills, etc., sometimes those skills in COBOL, etc., aren't really there. And they're not necessarily there for people to ask. And so GenAI has a fantastic opportunity of helping that next generation population coming from schools and colleges to just learn what the application does. They're smart cookies, right? They can pick up languages pretty quick. But one of the key things in picking up any language is being able to understand what the application is supposed to do, and what the application and the feature functionality is supposed to do. And I think GenAI is, as I say, it's a super example. It's a super opportunity. If we can train it well with the right languages and the right structures and the right best practices and those sorts of things, I think it can rapidly accelerate that next generation coming out of education to really get them up to speed as rapidly as possible. And we all look at how quick we can get them being productive. And I think this can, as I say, rapidly accelerate that activity. So, hey, I'm super excited about it. If we can train it right, as Jason said, right, training it is the key to all this. But it's a fantastic opportunity for us.
Yeah, that's interesting. I was wondering, based on that, what are you seeing as far as introducing generative AI into these use cases, and how can it help explain what is happening within code that's there right now? There could be millions of lines. Especially a new developer doesn't even know where to start. So, how can a generative AI model kind of assist that process?
I think one of the biggest areas is some of these scales of these applications are just immense, and they span multiple, if not hundreds, of modules and kind of sections and components. And being able to understand that is number one, but then being able to kind of break those down into various kind of functional components and understand what those functional components do. Hey, look, we have for a long time tried to break down those monolithic applications into even like component services. So we could ZOS Connect enable them or API enable them, etc., to get more out of them and to break them down into kind of functional pieces. But I think GenAI on its own, I don't think necessarily is the answer to everything. I think putting GenAI together with such tools and capabilities that allow you to break down a full application structure it's kind of bringing multiple tools together to just leverage the power of that collaborative response from a tooling perspective. That's when this gets really, really powerful. You also obviously get some applications that are not just necessarily COBOL or just Java. You get a lot that are now becoming much more kind of intertwined with multiple languages. Certainly on the ZOS platform now, you've got applications that the new stuff is written in Java and the older stuff is more of the legacy side, but the rich feature function stuff is still written in COBOL, and you have to have the two interoperate. So tools that can span those, I think, become incredibly powerful and incredibly useful. Mark, thoughts?
Yeah. So I agree with everything you've said, that it's really about having a tool to understand the application. It isn't just, we throw some generative AI and it's a one-off piece. It's putting it together into something that does the visual representation, the charting, that can track the logic flow, that can track the data flow. All those things have been tools we've had for quite some time to really help developers understand code. But what people have been asking me for decades is something that could go through and really explain what it does in that business context. And I always thought that was impossible. But then GenAI is the way to do it. And what that enables is that they can very quickly go through those programs. Instead of a million lines of codes or 500,000 lines of code, they can start to look at those descriptions and go, this is the section. It's like putting little tabs in there. They can quickly go through and say, I think it's this area, but instead of looking at 100 lines of code and trying to think that's the one that does this verification, they can read the description and go, yes, that's it, then go to the code. So it really, really makes things much, much faster, and it's a great application of AI. But it has to supplement everything else that we have.
Yeah, so Mark, I'd like to add something to what you said there. In my experiences, when I was started off as an engineer, developer, one of my bigger challenges were, yes, we had to understand the code base, we had to understand the modules, even down to the functions that were in those modules. But where I believe generative AI can help us tremendously is understanding within a given module, within a given function, how did I get here? Who called? What was the call path to arrive at a given function? Get that understood, get that explained. But also then, where do I go downstream from here? Where do the output of this function go to next? What's the next path in the execution where it goes? Also getting clarity, not only what modules and functions do, but how they relate and how they flow amongst themselves is another critical piece to reducing that cognitive load that will be on developers trying to figure all that out, especially if the seasoned professionals are no longer around to help or ask with those type of questions.
Yeah, and it's just a matter of this analyzes it and presents it in a shorter summary. Sure, you can look at all the code and figure it out. I could take a full dump and I can read it. I'd rather have Abendate do the summary. And it's the same with code. Yes, I can trog through that and figure it all out. I would rather have something give me a short summary to make it easier.
Yeah, it's very prescient to what's going on today. I mean, a lot of times we're seeing everybody's turning more toward this idea of composite AI models, right? So you have one model that has a lot of expertise in translating, say COBOL to Java, another one that's kind of good at uncovering logical threads, another one that's really good at sort of looking at these from this business workflow perspective or automation type perspective. And so those different models, when taken together, it generates that context because no one AI, no one machine learning model has all of that knowledge in itself. They're only as good as they're taught to be, right? So we're seeing a lot of power coming into that where you have multiple logical models and they're specialized in like code analysis, refactoring, data attribution, filtering and tagging, like just different parts of that structure, and then they come together to provide that. So how do you kind of see that playing out in your world right now?
Yeah, so Jason, that's a really good point. And that's something that we've been evaluating and working with. What we're building, the foundation for what we're building is a multi-model type of architecture. We are in position to use the best models for the use cases that we're trying to solve across the board. And we're building testing platforms also that will facilitate and help us in that journey with determining what are the best models to use for a given situation. So that's a really good point.
Yeah, testing is another big one. That's a huge part. I mean, everybody's trying to figure out like how much testing is enough or too much, or what's relevant to test. And it's the same, with the code. So it's very, very important. Well, all right, let's go ahead and take it into what we're specifically doing now. So, how do you think that generative AI solutions will improve the mainframe, development and operation experience for the people working within the organizations?
Well, let me start, and I'll do the operations side, and I'll let the rest of the team kind of help us with the development stuff. GenAI, as we've said, and I started off with the next generation of mainframers coming out of schools and colleges. Even if they're coming out into the operations space, we all kind of value that expert on our shoulder, that mentor to look up to and how to learn things. We're getting tools these days, even on the operations side, that are incredibly complex. They're looking at some incredibly complex things, and actually they're probably using AI and ML to kind of come up with some level of predictive analysis on whether there's a cause and effect, and something's going to go bang in 19 minutes if we don't do something about it. They're built by PhDs, and some of them take a PhD to assess and to read and to understand. I think that's where another application of GenAI is coming into the whole space, which is, if we can encapsulate that SME, that real lifetimer SME mainframer in a set of GenAI tools and models, then I think we can apply that same concept of a buddy, of a mentor, and the system being that buddy and mentor to guide the next generation of mainframers through into understanding what are complex relationships. The mainframe is a fantastic platform for very different types of workload, but very optimized types of workload, running it at a certain clip at a certain rate. It does transactional stuff very well. The opposite side of the transactional stuff, if something goes bang, it goes bang very quickly. And being able to understand lots of those dynamic parts, whether it's hardware, software, firmware, network, whatever, or application change, being able to draw lines between those and come up with a conclusion, and then an action based on that, what it's seeing, I think is another fantastic area for us. GenAI in operations, and I think that's going to be becoming much more important as we go through the next few years.
Well, on the developer side, there was the use case we mentioned before of just understanding the code and having an explanation of it. I think the other areas that can help is in code reviews, to be able to go through there, identify standards, and give assistance to kind of make sure that the code not only meets their standards, but has that same style and looks the same. And that makes a real difference. So I think AI can certainly apply there. Test case generation to come up with the minimal amount of data necessary to test something and get good coverage. And just a general code assistant that will go in and make suggestions or supply editing tips and working with them. All those things will help those new to the mainframe adapt quickly and work more efficiently and really free them to be more creative and not as bogged down in some of the details.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. I mean, you mentioned review. That's another big area where there's this high volume of activity of constant check-ins going on within the enterprises, multiple developers trying to make commits all the time. And then there's just no way to find somebody who's ready to do that review. So if an AI can help us review 99% of the cases, we can still, that leftover 1% that represents real anomalies that need to be addressed, that's where your experts need to focus their time. I mean, they could be full-time working on that and still probably have plenty to do, but at least their work has been filtered out by an AI or something like that. So in these early stages of where you're going, how are you seeing companies kind of implement this so that they can keep the development up to standards, even though they have these like very high resource constraints?
Yeah, so Jason, I've been in that position before. So, I was project lead for many, many years, and I was under that exact situation where, we had a fairly large team with high velocity, and it was overwhelming at times doing the code reviews. And, at a certain point, there was enough cognitive load on myself where I was even having to question myself where, I should stop with these reviews and resume at another time. I needed a mental break from what was happening. And in particular, when you have a team with a lot of junior developers, the scrutiny on the code review has to be, taken to a completely different level. I would have loved, being in that situation, to have a generative AI assistant on my shoulder to help me with that, right? We could do like a first line defense on commits. We could have externalized best practices and guidelines that we could have the generative AI take care of a significant portion of that, and leaving my mental state more fresh to look at the more complex code that was being submitted. The other part of that too is thinking about this problem before. If you have that first level review, code review, that is done by generative AI, you can also start to learn the behaviors of the developer and start to intercept common problems a given developer is prone to. We all are in that realm. So we can get to learn the code base that they're submitting in, and grow and build intelligence on top of that, and make recommendations back to that developer long before it even gets to me, for them to start making adjustments to that code base. So I see that as an area that will grow as we all grow with GenAI. I think that's going to play a pivotal role in having a multi-step code review process and utilizing GenAI to do that.
Yeah, that Copilot model is very popular on ordinary development side, but it's probably even more relevant here, I would say, to have something that can kind of in real time assist them as they're moving along through this process.
Yes, absolutely.
So speaking of that, I mean, what would you say the economic impact is of being able to kind of shift left things like education as well as code review as well as testing and earlier in the life cycle, and how are enterprises assessing that so far?
Well, I think that, again, from my perspective of being involved at the coding level for so many years, I'm all for that shift left, introducing all of that way early on in the development cycle. Almost aligns itself to in the agile world where we want to fail fast, right? We want to fail fast, make a course correction, and move on. We want to start looking at our code the same kind of way. So we shift left, we do these other processes, code review, we could do the linting process, etc. Get that information back to the developers as soon as possible early on, because we all know if we miss bugs early on in a development process, it's going to be way late into our development cycle, and the severity of the bug is just going to compound itself, or potentially get just lost in the complexity of the code base, and then something that we would hit out as we go live in the field. So by shifting left, we're going to continue to reduce those types of bugs, and we could just be more proactive and on top of it. And it just overall will cost less in time and money and resources to address those problems as early on as possible. And GenAI is going to play a huge role in that, and we could automate just about everything in that regard.
Yeah, interesting. So, what is BMC implementing so far in this space? I mean, you have an interesting set of capabilities. I know it's kind of been part of your story for many years, actually. It's already been involved in some of your operational AI ops type approaches and some of the additional capabilities, even on the dev side, that improve experience. But what are those efforts looking like in your group now?
I'll just kind of take a stab at overall BMC. I think it's, and actually, Jason, as you mentioned, we've been on this journey for a while. On a wider BMC perspective, we've been certainly looking at this for at least the last couple of years, and starting to trickle out more and more capability in terms of. I think the first real opportunity for us was around kind of customer support, that type of stuff, where we have big knowledge bases today. Obviously, you have case histories, and you have documentation, knowledge articles, this, that, and the other, and helping customers do much more in that space is probably shall we say, an easy win to a certain extent. It's a logical application, an extension of a chat interface, right? So kind of chat GPT kind of style. In the service management space, clearly helping customers get quicker resolution to various situations. That's been a journey that we've been on for a while now. And specifically on the mainframe, was it January timeframe, we released our first kind of GenAI offering as part of our Z Advisor enterprise product. So helping you use GenAI to kind of do monthly emails and email summaries based on your developer productivity metrics that we're starting to see some really good traction with. People trying to understand, how productive are we as an organization? How productive are we? Where can we improve? Where can we kind of tweak our process, etc.? Where can we be more effective? Using things like Dora metrics as a base for that, and Dora from a developer side, not kind of the European side of what Dora means with operational resilience. So ultimately, we've been on this journey for a while, and trying to get the commonality of how it kind of sits and how it feels, I think is certainly a big initiative within BMC these days, to make sure we look and feel like a one application of this type of technology. Because I think it's all too easy just to kind of drop into each product does its own thing, and each product, and then it becomes very, does this look and feel the same way? I mean, do I want to go to a certain tool in the cloud or wherever it is, and that's where my GPT kind of solutions are, and my GenAI solutions? You want it integrated, but you want it integrated in a consistent way. And I think that's very much the journey that BMC has been on and will continue to be on, certainly for the foreseeable future, and the mainframe will be part of that.
The commonality of that experience, it really needs to stay consistent no matter where you are in the suite. And so that's a good overall arching goal to have, I'd say. So I guess to talk about one more idea here, we've talked a little bit about mainframe testing, and how can AI kind of help us really focus in on what the problems are? What is the test overhead of, like, how many we're running, and what's the minimum viable data for running test cases? And how can an AI help us do that so that we're not spending more effort on the testing than we are on the development itself? What can we do there?
Yeah, for that one, really, you mentioned minimal viable data, and that's something I've been working with for quite some time. Looking at code coverage, looking at the actual code itself, and determining the minimal paths to go and hit everything, and then from that with the data. And that's something where it's done with traditional analysis, but I think AI on top of that can really provide an analysis so a developer can say, I made this change what would it take to test that? And it would come back and say, you need 3 records, 4 records, something probably shockingly small. Where right now, people are testing, they don't really know. And they think the more data is the better. And they have no real intelligence. What AI can do is give them that intelligence so they can say, it's 10 records, 20, and that's it. And I can assure you it will hit all those test cases. That can speed up testing dramatically and give them more confidence so they're not wasting time with tests that are way over the top and may not even hit all the test cases.
So I'd like to add something to what Mark is saying. We know, even though we may identify what the minimal viable data is, sometimes it's very difficult to get actual hands-on data, whether it's us internally or from customers, etc. So, another area that's emerging here is synthetic data generators to help generate the training materials that we need for the use cases that we're working towards. And that's another area we're focusing in to facilitate our need for data that's just really difficult to get. So that's going to be another area just within generative AI. I think you're going to start to see a lot of movement in this space with synthetic data generation tools.
Yeah, you need the data to be valid. You don't need it to be, exact or accurate to what's in there, because that information is usually private if it's
Right.
real.
Yep.
Or realistic, I guess, is the goal. So on the development side, can you provide any examples of how generative AI would enhance code comprehension and collaboration among developers within mainframe environment?
Yeah, I mean, I could take that first. It could be a very extreme, daunting task for especially junior developers when they're introduced to a code base. It could be very intimidating, etc. And just wrapping your head around, as we were saying earlier, what are all these modules? How are they all related? What's happening here, etc. Having the ability to utilize GenAI to take first attack at the code base to generate the documentation. Again, I've been in that situation before. I go into code base. What do developers tend to do? They comment the obvious, right? You're reading through the code. They're putting comments practically on every line of code, but they're just really commenting the obvious. To have GenAI look at that and just really purely look at the code base and generate the documentation and then automatically update a repository, whether it's comments in the code or we're extracting that and putting it into a database for documentation purposes. We can signal to other team members when there's commits. After a code review is done, new code is submitted to the repository. We can trigger GenAI automation to update the documentation. We can hook into collaborative applications that are out there today that we use during our development cycle. We can notify the team members of updates in a collaborative way. Everybody stays in sync with the latest documentation, respect to code changes. And then again, everybody's getting notified about that. So Jason, if you and I are working together on a project, you may get updates that are triggered based on my code submits. Could generate and will generate conversation between us, especially if that's an area that you're also working in. You may question why things were done a certain way, etc. It will help us have the details fall through the cracks at the development level between the developers, where we have these facilities in place so that we always know what's happening and why it's happening and from whom it's happening, and we wrap that all up in a collaborative environment. That would be a really ideal situation for an engineering team.
Yeah, that's interesting. And then from there, the next step is basically, enhancing that collaborative glue so that these issues are basically populating whatever set of tools you're using. So if people are communicating through Slack, or if they're using their service management dashboard, or if they're using their, whatever tools the teams need to use to manage projects and workloads, usually a good AI solution can interoperate with those as well. So that's obviously a big part of it when we bring this up to the higher level.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Another big one of the well-known shortcomings of Gen AI so far is it has this capacity for hallucination, where it can basically make up its own reality based on what it knows, which is usually an incomplete set of data. So how can you make sure the models are delivering accurately for developers and complying with the different development standards, especially within companies? They, or they have multiple mainframes. They have a certain common set of rules that they're trying to follow, or kind of like their own set of bylines they follow by. So how can we help prevent that from happening?
Yeah, so Jason, with what we're doing with our work is we have a 3-point approach to this situation here. So one, we define what we're calling our gold standard or best practices on it's the standard we're holding the LLMs to. As I mentioned earlier, we are a multi-model type architecture with what we're building. So we're evaluating many different types of LLMs. But the 3-point approach is we defined a gold standard, and we have first point is manual testing. We have people working, generating or working with COBOL code as an example, or assembler, etc. We have experts working day in and day out, and they're just doing that manual effort, right? They're working against a given LLM, they're checking the output of the LLM, and they're checking it against the gold standard. And then based on that, we're tweaking the gold standard, or we have to take another step. Another point is working with prompt engineering. Everybody's heard prompt engineering at this point. It's a way for us to guide the LLM to the desired accurate results that we're looking for. So the second point there, we're putting a lot of work, a lot of effort into prompt engineering to help with the accuracy of what we're doing. And I think the most exciting part of what we're doing right now is we're actually building an automated testing tool where we're running data through the testing tool against the different LLMs that we're working with. And we have a pretty sophisticated algorithm for a scoring system that will help us to let us know that if hallucinations were being encountered. And then based on the results of our automated testing tool, again, we go back and we start tweaking, working with some prompt engineering, et cetera, working with the gold standard, et cetera. But it's this automated testing tool that is really, really, really going to reduce the amount of testing time that's needed against the LLMs that we're working with to get the accuracy that we're looking for. It's almost like a hallucination detection system. That's what we're putting together.
Sounds groovy.
Yes.
All right. Well, this has been very valuable. Any other thoughts on the convergence of GenAI and the mainframes from our team here?
To me, as I said before, there's those problems we've had for decades that we've tried and never had a satisfactory solution. And finally, we have GenAI, and it's a time to look back over those problem areas and see, will this work? It's better to start with the problem and see if it works than just take AI and say, throw it at it and start off. But it offers the opportunity in some select areas to really have an advancement and provide a solution that will help the developer experience that we've never had before. And for that, I think it's exciting.
Yep, agreed.
Jason, I'll just offer one maybe thought for the end, not necessarily an answer. I think there is a logical journey we're all going on here, right? And specifically around the developer journey. You could probably predict what's going to come after reviewing code and all that type of stuff, and test augmentation, and we know what Copilot does, and we know code whisperers and various things kind of do. I think there's going to be a very interesting point. How quickly it comes, maybe in the next few years, if not sooner, on where IP starts to become challenging here. Who owns IP? Maybe this is the time to become and retrain as a lawyer. I have no clue, an IP lawyer. But there's going to be some very interesting challenges. Where did my code come from? Who contributed to the LLMs that actually caused my code to kind of be created, or allow my code to be created? That's going to be an interesting journey. That's
like a whole other angle. I love it. Let's save that for our next podcast, I would say, because I have a lot of thoughts on that. When this stuff first started appearing, it became definitely a high area of interest, because how are we supposed to, how are all these companies supposed to know what's been contributed to their code and who owns it, who actually owns this output. And if it was originated from an AI model, then who does that answer to?
Exactly. So there you go. Maybe we should just retrain. That's the future.
Yep.
I do have one question. How does generative AI differ from traditional AI methodologies in enhancing the developer experience, or enhancing the mainframe in general?
I mean, I guess you can take it as, AI in the past has been thought of more as an applied sort of AI, whereas the generative form, it has more variables, and the logic by which it works is basically balancing the probabilities of like thousands or millions of parameters technically, right? So it's kind of generating deductions based on a lot of different factors. Now, and that becomes especially important in a highly complex system. But maybe you have a different attitude about like how is generative AI different from AI in general?
The way I've always understood it is GenAI is just one facet of the whole AI ML space, right? And AI overall is a very, very big topic. We use it to predict outages and failures and this, that, and the other, and we try and take action based on the results that it gives us. GenAI creates and curates content for us. Somebody told me the very simple example. It's GenAI is nothing smarter than being able to predict the next word in a series of words.
Exactly.
Okay, and you take out of that what you will. All right, but there are applications and very good applications of all these things. If one can help you understand simply in words that we all understand, or maybe words I can understand, C spot run type stuff, a very complex issue, that's great. That's what I need. If another part of the system doesn't care about that, it just needs to very quickly understand what's the next in the sequence and what's potentially going to fail so it can do an automated action, that's the right application for that. So I think it all depends on the consumer. Is it an automated system that's going to consume this? Is it human that's going to consume this? What do we need this for?
And I think that's one of the reasons why, Dave, I gravitated towards the Gen AI space, because I spent many years building data visualization solutions and user experiences and just worried about the day in the life of our customers, our users. And when generative AI hit the scene, I looked at this as a fantastic way to augment their lives with AI. It's no longer AI that happens deep on the servers somewhere and it's doing all the sophisticated type work, etc. This is something that we can bring to the forefront, put in front of the users to help them with their daily journey using our software products to make their lives better, to help with making better decision making, helping with their product experiences, etc. So I tie our users, our customers, very closely to generative AI and how we can help them. That's the way I've been approaching it.
That's great. This has been a very interesting conversation, not only about capabilities we have now, but what's to come in the future, and it's a very exciting outlook for what's to come in the future. So, Jason, Dave, Anthony, Mark, thanks for joining us today.
All right.
Thank you.
And thank you to everyone listening. Be sure to check the show notes for links to some further assets where you can find more information and more of our panelists' thoughts on GenAI and the mainframe. And please don't hesitate to drop us a line and let us know what you think. We'll talk to you next time on The Modern Mainframe. Take care. You're listening to The Modern Mainframe, BMC's Intelligent C Optimization and Transformation podcast, covering the latest trends and issues in the mainframe and how BMC AMI Solutions can help you make change your competitive advantage.